I think that today, for me, is really, it's all about core truths. It's about that idea of, I wasn't going to tell this story, but for years and years I used to always get lost at Central Station. Because I'm not really good with spatial intelligence, and there's a lot of corridors. And I used to end up walking, trying to get out of the station for a long time. You know, I could be very trapped. And then, one day, I just realised that there was a clock tower, and that I could always get my bearings off the clock tower. And I've never been lost since. And it's this really simple thing that once you have a reference point in life, and once you have something that is like a compass, that life suddenly, it just makes sense. And all of the really complex stuff, the stuff that for me is like wandering around in corridors, our life gets really complex and we build a lot of that up. And it's just, what we need to be able to do is to just focus on what is the thing that's really important. What is the truth at the center of it? So I want to talk a bit today about purpose, not just our purpose as a community, because I think, you know, when as a church we're 3 years old now, and then we've come to a point where we have a strong identity, and you know, there's this reality about who we are that we can look at and say this is who we are. But also, what is our purpose as just individual people who have a relationship with God? And that idea of being able to have a moral compass in life, that comes from the fact that God is in your life and God directs you in everything that you do. And I found this quote by Carl Sagan this week. Carl Sagan was a scientist, but then later in his life he started writing this incredible science fiction that just imagined new worlds and what the universe was like. And he says this, he says, one of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any lessons of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we have been so credulous. So the old bamboozles tend to persist as the new bamboozles rises. That was really hard to say. But, you know, I think that there's a strong truth to that once you spend a long time kind of wandering around in these corridors, you start to say to yourself, yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing. You know, I'm counting the corridors, or, you know, you give yourself reasons to do this sort of stuff. And it allows you to feel like you're not wasting your time. And it becomes to the point where you're like, oh, there's that direction that I could have in my life, but I really shouldn't think about that. I've got to concentrate on my corridors. I've got to concentrate on my bamboozles, because it's just too painful to think that maybe everything that you're doing in life is really just a lot of complex energy that you're putting into something, and it's really simple. You know, and I loved what Mel was saying before about how, you know, coming to Crave is this ability to let go of a lot of that stuff that people attach to church, all that stuff that you have to do that is just effort for the sake of effort, because, you know, it's really important that we look busy here. And there are times in our life that I think we're caught up in our little world, and God really wants to find a way to just break through to us, to just turn that light on, to get us to see the direction, see the purpose that we have in life. But we're so addicted, and it's so painful to admit that we've been wasting our time, that we get into this little battle with God. And, you know, we let little bits of what God might want to say to us in here, and we let little bits in there, and, you know, maybe we have our daily devotional moment that we have, and we read the Bible verses, and we do the prayer, or however it is that we engage with God, or we come to church on Sunday, and we open ourselves up to God. But then the process is you step out of the building and you're like, right, now back to the real, you know, the reality of life. All that stuff, the stuff that is really important to us. So the process becomes one that's really, really strange. You know, it's one where you're just trying not to look at the truth that's standing there in your face. And over the last few weeks, I've been preaching a lot on the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the time that Jesus spent in the desert, and when he came back to his hometown and he had a clear message and he knew what it was about. And that was a process for Jesus. I really believe in those early days of his life where he was getting the truth about what his ministry was going to be, what his purpose was in life, and he was getting it straight. And the devil comes with all these distractions, you know, fly off the top of the building and, you know, turn all the stone into bread and make everyone depressed, and I want to distract you with a million different things. And Jesus is too wise. He walks right through the middle of it. And then he comes back to his hometown and he says, okay, this is the good news. I'm going to declare that this is the year of opening the eyes of the blind and the year of God's favour. And no one is with him. Everyone rejects it because what he's saying is too much for them to handle. You know, this journey that we go on, it's not such a simple thing as just finding out, oh, this is the truth about God. Okay, I'll believe that. That's okay. We go on these journeys and we're addicted to a lot of the lies and we're addicted to a lot of the bamboozle. And we get so caught up in it. God's trying to break us free. And I think that day-to-day life, the decisions that we make, we're in the middle of that. That's all happening. I sat down recently and had a chat with a guy called Dan. Dan is a chaplain at a university. And he's a very conservative guy. He's an Anglican chaplain. And I sat down and I had this coffee with him, and I was really surprised that even though I was probably the sort of person that people in his group would not approve of very highly, this person had such an open mind towards me. He just wanted to hear my life journey. And it was one of these really amazing moments when you can share what's happened in your life and reflect on your journey, and just someone listening to you actually lets you see it again for what it is. And I was telling him about my story and how I ended up in the place where I am in life at the moment. And I said, well, it's so funny because the first 2 decades of my life, I was just struggling to get my relationship with God right. And it was this ongoing battle. And I finally came to the end of it. And I was 21 and I finally came to a point where I accepted who I was. I accepted the fact that God loved me, and I stepped into a relationship with God. And as I did that, everything in my life just fell apart. Just that moment. And it was just such a strange thing to me, that at the moment that I connected with God and it got right, all this other stuff in my life fell apart. I had a youth ministry that I was building, that was gone. I had a big group of friends that I was connected with, that was all gone. I had a relationship with my family, that was awkward for a while. All this stuff. You know, I was halfway through a correspondence course to become a Pentecostal preacher. All of it was off. And it was so funny. This is the same story that I've heard from so many people. I came to a point in my life where there were a billion things going on, and then all of a sudden I made a decision to get right with God. And that was it. The rest of it just kind of fell aside. And I think because so many of us have that story in common, is the reason why we form a community. Because we're people who come almost like refugees from different churches where there's welcome and acceptance in theory, and it's just not happening in practice, no matter how hard everyone is trying. It's just not happening, and you end up with people and they're kind of lost, and they've come to a point where accepting myself and having a relationship with God has meant that I'm on this journey by myself, and here we are, we're a group of people that are together for that reason. And I think that that's what Jesus went through. I think that that's that whole process of being in the wilderness. The moment that he got right with God, the moment that he was able to tell the devil to leave me alone, that's not the truth, and articulate his ministry perfectly. Everything's lost. Okay, this truth means that it's a truth that I have to believe, and I have to be alone while I'm doing it. And the funny thing about MCC churches, over 40 years of our existence, we've come to realise is we don't tend to make a lot of converts. What we tend to do is pick up people who have been converted and are now broken. And, it's like this metaphor that Paul uses in Corinthians. He talks about different people plant the seed, other people water them, other people nurture them. I think we're the people who kind of put the broken terracotta pot back together and, stick a bit of, I think they have tape you can use to put the broken stem back together and hope that the plant will fix itself. That's a ministry I think that we have. But I want to share with you now a little bit about Elijah's journey, because I was reading in 1 Kings this week, and the story of Elijah, it's not something that we talk about a lot, but his story, I think, was like ours in many ways, because the first chapters of this story of Elijah, it's miracles, and Elijah is just the sort of guy who seems to shoot miracles out of his fingertips. But then it starts to get more complicated. Did you say that was Scott?
I was shooting miracles.
I thought that I said he shoots out miracles, and you said, "Oh, like you." We're all superheroes deep down inside, that's true. But this conflict happens because the king of Israel starts to tear the people of Israel away from following God and tears them away from their true purpose. And Elijah declares that there's going to be a drought. There's a drought in the land. And there's a few screaming sessions. It's not very pretty. And it comes to this point where this contest happens. And Elijah and the prophets of the false god Baal are on the mountaintop. And they have this massive pyre with sacrifices on top of it. And Baal is incapable of lighting the fire. So they try and they try and they try and they make idiots of themselves. And it doesn't work. And then Elijah prays and the fire comes down from heaven and the sacrifice is consumed. And you would think that that was the moment of victory. But at that very moment, the king brings in his armies and expels Elijah, and Elijah has to run away. Now, what a weird thing to happen. This battle between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, it rages for years, and then just at the moment that Elijah wins, the army chases him out into the wilderness. And there he is, alone. So he hides under a tree for a while, and he becomes suicidal. He says to God, it's better if you just take my life. It's better if it's just over. And instead of dying, angels come to him, and he's fed by angels. And then I'm going to read a little bit of it. It comes to a point where, if you can bring this up, the word of the Lord comes to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? And he replies, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They tore down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. And he's in this point where he's just got absolutely nothing. And I can relate to him because it's been my story as well, and the story of so many people that I've heard. And God says to him, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rock before the Lord. The Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And some people have suggested that what that should be translated is there was just a period of silence. Or a whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and he went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave. And that's the place, I think, that many of us come to. We get to this point where this massive battle rage. I had to find some way of keeping my faith in God alive. And for me, I spent 20 years trying to do it and trying to get it right and trying to find a way forward. And then I came to a point of what should have been victory in my life. But at the same moment, it's a moment of running away. And then in all of it, all these things that happen, you experience God just in the silence of it all. Sometimes I think that we need to allow ourselves to be stripped back and let go of all of the different things that we think are so important, so that we can see the one thing that really matters. And it's the presence of God, not in any of these things, not in the battle with the prophets of Baal, not in the earthquakes and the fire and all the glorious things that we think to happen. But at the very end of it, when you're stripped back to absolutely rock bottom, and there's just silence, and in that silence you're able to recognize God is there. That's the moment when you hear the voice of God. That's the moment where you actually see what is that truth, what is that way forward that I'm able to follow. And as long as we're caught up in all the other bits and pieces, we're not able to see that one thing. I have this little picture of a mega church. Because this is more important than feeding the starving. How how do we get to this point in history? You know, you read the history of the church and all the times when they built up. There was a time when they built up gold and silver and they took over nations and they ran empires and all that different stuff. And it was as though we went on a journey over the history of the church, those of you who've read it, to getting away from that sort of stuff. But we're still all about building. And we build up these massive empires. Years ago, my partner Steve used to work at a church and he had to pick up some stuff from it. I went and I saw it. And I got shown the back rooms, the corporate areas, and I could not believe the luxury that they had these massive corporate meeting rooms with like 15 chairs on either side, and it's all beautiful wood and it's timber, and then we went into the pastor's office, and they had a walk-in bathroom and bedroom there in the office, and all this different stuff. And there was a Pro Heart hanging on the wall. Pro Hearts everywhere. And then it was really funny. I'll never forget this story. As we're leaving, we go through the exit, and they have their own Gloria Jeans thing set up there at the side, and I'm like, oh, does Gloria Jeans run something there? No, that belongs to the church. So I had to get some money out of the ATM. And normally you get charged $2, but it charged me $4. And it's like, oh, okay, so $2 go to the bank and $2 go to the church. That's just so funny. You know, churches all over the place that are doing this, that are building up these massive piles of wealth. And look, I'm not doing this to shame those churches. I can understand how people get tangled up in that way of living. But we keep measuring ourselves by these same standards over and over again. Oh, how many people come along to your church? And how much do you get in the offering? And those are the two standards that you're constantly asked about. That's what's really important, mate. It wasn't about God, was it? It wasn't about having relationships with other people. It wasn't meant to be about getting out there and feeding people who are hungry and bringing liberation to people, breaking the chains and all those things that were in that clip before. No, it's all about these measures that we have for ourselves. It's almost like having beauty magazines. You know how that happens in cultures over time? You get the beauty magazines and it says, this is what beautiful people are supposed to look like. And there was a time when they were just for women, but you know, we guys have to put up with them as well. And then all it does is lower everybody's self-esteem. It doesn't actually raise the level of beauty in the country, unfortunately. But these beauty magazines, you know, we're constantly comparing ourselves to that. And we're not good enough because we don't live up to that standard. And I think that even for us, 3 years into our existence, there's something in the back of our mind that goes, oh, I hope we get enough people today. I hope we get enough in the offering. I hope we get these measures right. And it's those questions that lead people down the road that actually makes you end up there, if you're good at it. And we get competitive. You know, I was thinking this week just about the way that our society is so competitive. And I was thinking about Paul's body, the image of the church as a body, and we're all different parts of it. And I wondered, what would it be like if all our body parts started competing with each other? Like if our, you know, the stomach actually thought, I bet I could upgrade to being a heart, and, you know, I could probably outdo that other heart and do a better job. And if I pump more blood, then I'll end up, you know, I'll get an upgrade. I'll be able to move up here in the body. Now, what would it be like if, as a body, we were to compete with one another? We do this as a society. If our body started doing that, we'd be dead in minutes. And if our society acts in that way, if our churches act in that way, if we're trying to get the numbers in here, and there's, let's face it, another church down the road there, another church down the road, and another church in this building after us, and we're all competing for the same numbers, then we're not functioning as a body. But if we focus on the things that actually do matter in life, then in that, we're able to hear the voice of God. We're able to actually have that direction that we meant to have. And how we listen to God in all of this, how we actually break away from that. When those things are so addictive, when that urge to be pretty and be bigger and to grow, and that urge to be famous and all those different things is such a loud voice. And the voice of God just comes in the silence. You can't just flick a switch and then start hearing it. You have to go through a life process. You have to go through a journey. You know, Elijah had this this glorious experience when he opened up his arms to heaven and the fire came down and burnt up the offering on the altar. And it was like in that moment, I've made it. This is brilliant. Well, that's part of the journey too. We have these moments of success and we've had ourselves on the back. And that's an important part of the journey. But then God is saying, okay, now that was good that you had that experience. Now I've got to teach you that it's not all about that. So the journey becomes complex and we all go through this. Sometimes God is not about making that spectacular thing happen. It's actually about getting rid of those other voices that crowd in and take away from what is really important in this situation, you know? It's these people. It's the fact that we have a journey that's in common. And because we have that in common, we're able to help each other. We're able to help each other on the way. And if we're able to do that, then we're actually able to be a part of what it is that God is doing in our lives. And look, in conclusion, I do want to talk a little bit about grace, because it's easy to say that you should all hear this voice, you know, you should all block out all these other voices and just hear that one voice. You should all be spiritual and in tune enough to do that. But I want to remind you that the fact that this is a journey, the fact that none of us are there yet, the fact that we do get distracted, the fact that we all are doing a lot of things that are distracting, is something that's all right, because that is the journey that God is taking us through. And I heard this expressed once in the idea that all the different streams end up in the sea. And we know that that's where all the water is going to end up. But what about the droplet of water that gets trapped, gets stuck in a bucket? Or the droplet of water that gets swallowed by an animal? Or it gets processed into a bottle of spring water, or it gets frozen in the Arctic caps, and it's like, I'm never going to be able to make it. The stream was supposed to take me to the sea, but now I'm trapped in this place. But the funny thing is that water never feels anxious about that kind of thing. Water, pour yourself a glass of water, give it a minute, it's at peace. It's just resting there. It's not where it needs to be yet, but it knows. Well, maybe it doesn't know. Maybe it's just at peace because it is. But there's this great thing called the water cycle, which means that whether it takes a day or a week, or whether it takes 1 billion years, the water is going to end up in the sea. And this is what our relationship with God is like. We go on these bizarre journeys. We try and get in tune. We try and understand what it is that God is doing in our lives. We want to end up in the sea. And sometimes you get stuck in a bucket. You know, sometimes an animal drinks you. Sometimes you end up getting frozen. Our journeys don't always make sense. We end up going in the wrong directions. We end up trapped in the wrong places. But if we're able to focus on the fact that someone is actually guiding us in that process, someone is actually caring for us, someone is actually taking us on that journey, then you're able to find that peace. And it's about the things, I think, that you focus on. God speaks to us, I believe, in one another. God speaks to us in the things that we do that help us thrive. The things that we do that are actually helpful, not in so much, you know, being successful, but just in making other people happy and providing to community. People come to us with needs, and that's the voice of God. That's why Jesus said, when you listen to those who are hungry, when you fed them, you were feeding me. Because people's needs are the voice of God to us. What is it that we actually want to achieve as a church community, and what do each of us want to achieve in our lives? If we can still out all those other voices and focus on those things, which are the places where God is speaking to us, then we'll be able to find God in that stillness that Elijah found. So I want to invite you to pray with me for a minute, and then we're going to come to communion. God, I just want to thank you for your goodness and the way that you are always with us, the way that, you know, sometimes we get so distracted by many different things. And then at the end of it, you're there. You're still there. And I just pray that you would help each one of us just to open our eyes to your presence in our lives, just to become aware of the fact that you are with us, and you are guiding the process, and you are leading us to a certain place and a certain outcome, even when sometimes